I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane. Today is May 26th, 2022. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. Thursday, I have just a group of great friends. I call them companions who chop it up with me about whatever's on their mind. And who's here right now? Ndugu Yusef Mgeni, my colleague from St. Paul, Kamau King, my colleague who's in Atlanta, and Brenda Lyle Gray, my colleague who's in New Mexico. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Good to see you. Others may join us. But as always, let's jump right in. And we were doing some chit-chatting before we went live. One of the things you brought up, Yusef, was what's happening in Georgia. So let me throw it to you first, Yusef, and kind of what's on your mind, what are you thinking about, and what questions you have, and maybe you and Kamau can give us an idea, perspective on the election excitement in Georgia and what it means to the country.
Well, a couple of things. One, it was the work that the sister did down there. Help me with her name. She ran for governor.
Stacey Abrams.
Stacey Abrams, organizing people in Georgia, working as part of a tremendous get out the vote and registered voting effort, which the Georgia legislature has been steadily introducing legislation to try and undo. It's like a ball of string, and they want to roll it down a steep hill and completely make the gains that were recognized disappear. We elected, or the Georgians elected, a Jewish fellow, and they elected a black fellow who worked in John Lewis's office, which broke the monopoly in the Senate. And had it not been for, I call her Senator Enema from Arizona and Mnuchin from West Virginia, the Democrats would have control of both the Senate and the House with the vice president's tie-breaking vote. Now Trump has endorsed Herschel Walker to run against Kamau. You said the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Martin Luther King's former church, and
Warnock.
Martin Luther King Sr., Warnock.
Yeah.
And there have been some other interesting challenges that may lead to a runoff, but there's going to be a lot of national focus on Georgia, because what happens there is really going to test the strength of the Trump machine, the lost cause, the stolen election, and all of the fabrications that are coming out of the far right. And people are watching it very closely. Kamau, what's your take on the primary?
Herschel won. Both Herschel and Kemp won the Republican nomination with huge numbers. Kemp beat Perdue, who was a former senator, who was Trump supporter. He was a Trump supporter, and Trump endorsed him. But he lost. I think Kemp got 60 to 65 to 70% of the vote. So that may be some indication of the waning of Trump's influence. Now, Herschel Walker, a former football player and star of the Georgia Bulldogs football team, he left college when Trump had a football team in the USFL, and he gave Herschel a few $1 million to leave. But Herschel had won the championship that year, 1980, in college championship.
He won a Heisman Trophy too, didn't he?
I believe so.
Yeah.
But anyway, Herschel refused to debate in the primaries, and he also won by huge numbers. So I think the issue is going to come down with regard to straight party line votes. If the Republicans just vote straight down the ballot, then it's going to be, who's the strongest, the Democrats or the Republicans. And it's all about turning out. It's going to be about turning out the vote.
Let me ask you this, brother. Did Herschel get the endorsement get the nomination because Trump endorsed him, or was that loyal Georgia football fans and other places where
I
Herschel
think
played?
both. I think both. Yes.
Because he's not exactly an intellectual or a politician.
No, he's not. He's not exactly. An
Did he go there?
politician? As a
Did
matter
he go there?
of fact, Herschel has a lot of baggage.
Now, Angela could answer this question. Who was the colored fellow that Trump got to run against Joe Biden to try and break the vote? He was a rapper. What was his name?
Kanye West.
Kanye West. There we go.
All I remember was Jeezy. He goes also by Jeezy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it, brother. This strikes me as Kanye Part 2, you know?
Well, Herschel has a lot of baggage. I mean, he has domestic violence issues trailing him, mental issues trailing him, business impropriety issues trailing him. But as we know, well, as I see, if the country was willing to elect Trump, then Herschel, the baggage doesn't matter. The baggage may not matter. It's going to be about who turns out the vote, who turns out the vote. And I believe, and since I've been in Georgia for the last 40 years, I believe that if the Democrats can just carve off about 20% of the white population, Georgia's 35% black, 32 to 35% black. Mm-hmm. And it might be 1% of those blacks who are Republicans.
Except 12% of black males voted for Trump.
Nationwide or in Georgia?
Across the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I believe that if Stacey can carve off 20 to 25% of the white vote, which is a big piece, but 20%, then I think that we may have a chance. And if they debate, he's going to have to debate. Herschel's going to have to debate. And Warnock will eat him up.
No lie.
Warnock will eat him up in the debate, but that may not matter.
Yeah. Okay. We're talking about the elections in Georgia, Angela. And hello, Irma. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Irma.
Hey, Irma.
Irma, I read that draft. I read it at 4:00 this morning. I said, "Oh yeah, I can't miss this show."
Let me pivot then right now, Irma. I sent everybody the article that is in this week's Inside News. I'll show it on our share screen momentarily, but I wanted you to lead us in the conversation based on the article you wrote. I'll show the Word document here. The article, though, is entitled "The Buffalo, New York Massacre and the Unspeakable Horror of White Hatred in America." And if you would just walk us through both what you said and why you said it, what feelings, what data were informing your comment, your story. We lost you for a second there.
Yeah, here I am.
There we go.
I think that, well, first of all, I'm talking to you from Paris. This is my last night here. And so I think it was being awake, seeing this occurrence and just this feeling of almost emotional fatigue that we have seen so much happen in this country. We just had the anniversary of what happened with George Floyd. We have all kinds of things. Police violence is still going on. And unfortunately, we now have this what I would consider American Horror Story. Charleston happened, the Charleston 9, and now we have something that is as unspeakable and horrific as that happening again. And then the next day we have another event of children being killed. This country is on the brink of madness if it hasn't already gone there. And I think I wanted to try and talk to people about that and to share my frustration, but also to share this sense that this is what white racism has come to, and that it's not something that has disappeared. Those people who would like to believe that it's something that was in the past and that we don't have to worry about anymore, this is evidence that people are targeting us. The fact that we have legislation that is trying to reinstate a whitewash version of history. You know, this is stuff that we need to all think about, and it's just very troubling in that sense.
And so, your thoughts, your feelings as you were penning the piece, what would you say are the principal takeaways that people should have from reading The Unspeakable Horror of White Hatred? Yes, you've mentioned that we're not out of the woods and that we were not past hatred. But do you leave us with an idea of what we do and where we go?
I think part of what I want to say is that this is not a Black problem. White racism is a white problem, and white people have to take responsibility for the actions of their kindred folk and themselves for either their complacency or their lack of responsiveness. And we should not have something as horrific as this happen before people decide to act. American democracy is in trouble. We are being told what we can read and what we can't read. We have people who believe, you know, who have this notion, this radical, crazy notion of the replacement theory that white people are going to be replaced. The reality is that when Blacks had power, well, you know, during Reconstruction, when we had a Black president, there's been no attempt to erase, you know, or replace white people. This is a projection of their own paranoia, but also the acknowledgement that they know that they have created unspeakable and horrific crimes in the past and in the present. And they're projecting onto us sort of what their fear is going to happen. So we're dealing with fear. We're dealing with loss of privilege. We're dealing with anger about that, having to share what is supposed to be the spoils of a democratic country. All of these are like the kinds of things that I want people to sort of just become aware of and to just wake up. You know, racism has not disappeared. It didn't disappear when we elected a Black president. It showed that it is alive and well when we elected the 45th president, who did things like executive orders that attempted to make it illegal for federal employees and contractors to actually use terms like diversity and, you know, critical race theory. And, you know, I mean, it's like, how insane is that? This is what we call censorship. You know, we can sit and talk about other countries censoring, but that's exactly what's happening in this country. And nobody is saying anything about it, you know? And so Black people have always found ways through newspapers like Insight News. We've always found alternative means of telling the truth and educating our children. It is white people and their children who are going to grow up what I would call racially stupid. And I think they have to take responsibility for what they're going to do about it.
Irma, let me read a part of your essay here. And this jumped out at me. I said, maybe this is the headline. It didn't change the headline, but I almost did. And you can tell what jumped into my awareness. But you say you cannot erase historical facts. You can hide them, silence them, try to rewrite them, but the fact of slavery and enslavement cannot be destroyed because Black Americans are the bodies of evidence. That statement alone, I think, was just powerful and clear. You go on to say those who foment racial hatred are filled with an incredible racial inferiority complex and a profound sense of loss over having to share the privilege that they have never earned, but to which they feel entitled. And you referred to this last part, not teaching about the institutions of slavery in this democratic country's most historic and profound violation of human rights through the enslavement of millions of people will result in only a generation of racially ignorant white children who become racially stupid white adults who can only respond to racial justice protests with the lame excuse, "I didn't know." I thought that was just profound, the way you put it all together, the way you said it, and the power and the truth of it. Anybody else react to it? Kamau, go ahead.
Dr. Irma, are you familiar, and I know you are, with Francis Cress Wilson's
Yes.
confrontation?
Hey,
Yeah, back in the 60s, Francis Cress Wilson, a professor at Howard University, wrote a pamphlet, and I had it. I ran to try to get it, but it's out of place, called the Cress Theory of Color Confrontation.
Mhm.
And in that theory, she says that whites are jealous and afraid because of their lack of melanin. And people who have color scare them. Now, in America, that seems to be the case. I believe that this whole gun culture, their reluctance to back away from guns, even though the Second Amendment did not give individuals the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment was fostered and pushed forward by basically Georgia and South Carolina to protect militias, to create militias so that they could control slave rebellions. And that's why it says in the Second Amendment, you can't stop the militias. So I wonder whether or not these theories are true, that the reason that they are afraid and will not back away from this gun culture is because they think that they need them to protect themselves against minorities and particularly against blacks.
Come
Well,
on.
I don't think that
Francis
there's any
Wilson also.
question.
I'm sorry, Dr. Irma, go ahead. I just wanted to point out that in the late 60s and early 70s, Francis Wilson also talked about the replacement theory. And she said at the root of racism on the part of white supremacists was the fear of genetic annihilation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And people scoffed at her and really questioned her research and her methodology, but we're seeing it before our eyes today. Absolutely. There have been 222 mass killings in this country since the first of the year of the people on the planet, but this country constitutes just short of 50% of the mass killings that take place in the world. So the sickness, the destruction of democracy, the mental health issues this stems from, the racism, the archetypal form of racism throughout history has been against black people. And it has been repeated continuously that the civil rights movement was the engine that pulled every other social justice movement out of the station of discrimination. And we see it today, and we see the backlash today because of that.
So would that be then that what we're seeing a lot more of is these upticks in racial violence because of the fact that other things haven't worked? When you look at this replacement theory and you couple that with the one drop rule that white people created. So once you said that anytime a drop of black blood is in somebody that they're black, the moment you have two people from different races mix, it automatically increases the black population. So you're setting yourself up for the very thing that you're talking about is bad. But with the civil rights movement, with all of the progress we have made, you look at the amount of racial violence, you look at the amount of shooting of innocent and unarmed black people by officers of the law. Is this then the next phase of going forward and looking towards this is how we do it? This is how we go ahead and eliminate the quote unquote problem of people of color.
Irma, you were going to respond. Irma, what were you going to say?
A couple of things. I mean, I don't subscribe to Creswell's theory of melanin because there's no biological basis that melanin gives us an advantage, except that it keeps us, from getting sunburned and a lot of skin cancer. But I think that her analysis of this idea that whites are feeling this inferiority, and that as we become more inclusive and that we actually begin to practice democracy, which is that everyone has a chance, we are a people who have become resilient in in place of against all odds. And part of that has been that we were taught to believe that you had to be 10 times better, than your white counterparts. So we work harder, we do more, we try and excel. And that's beginning to show up, because in the past, what you had was white mediocrity got a pass because they were white. Now what we're seeing is that they're having to compete, and there is, in fact, a fear there. I would say, too, that this idea that the police is really an extension of the militia that was created to, quote unquote, protect white people from black people, and others as the time comes. So I think, the origins of the police is rooted in that sort of vigilante, what used to be the patty rollers. After freedom, they became, sort of militias, and now they're formally police forces. And I was just reading an article about a black policeman who's suing his supervisor, who was a white Latino, who basically constructed a false murder charge against him. Everyone knew it was false. Everyone said it wouldn't hold. And yet this man went to prison and actually lost his job. And so having that kind of structural power is what I think we have to be aware of, is that even with all the advances of the civil rights, structural white power, which is not located in individuals, but in systems, in the justice system, in the way in which the justice system metes out sentences, to black prisoners versus white prisoners or criminals. These things have never been dismantled. So they've been sort of undercover, and, we've seen some lull in them, but we have to now look at the way in which white supremacy is woven into the very structure of this country. And that's what we have to fight against, not individuals, but against the way in which that institutional power, and the gun lobbyists are an example of that kind of institutional power. You have white parents who are saying, stop killing our children, and they don't have to listen to anybody because they have the power. And that is about structural power.
And I would say that we can't ignore the magnifying aspects of social media. With the murder that happened, the mass murders that happened in Buffalo, basically the murderer, he did this on Twitch. He was on live. He had on social media his manifestos. And afterward, his manifesto has been read tens of thousands of times over by others. And so just as you're saying about these structural issues, there also is a structural issue that is manifesting in this digital virtual space and reality, where folks can go and they can essentially radicalize others. And the FBI has time and time again over the last decade talked about the radicalization of young white men on social media. And we have yet to fully and accurately address this issue because social media is run by companies. Like when the uprisings happened in Minneapolis, there were Black activists who were shadow banned. They were talking and they were amplifying the voices of Black folks in America, and their words were not getting through. Whereas there's white supremacists on these social media sites that their words will get highlighted. They will get clicks. They will monetize their hate. And it will radicalize, and it has been radicalizing millions of teens across this country. And that's scary. And we also have to address and hold these social media companies accountable for the hatred that they magnify.
I think we also have to hold accountable. Newspapers, traditional media that is calling the replacement theory sort of the flip side of the coin of critical race theory. They are not the same thing, and we have to be very careful not to buy into them constructing a scenario as if we're now talking about, dual sides of an argument. Critical race theory was designed in law schools to use as a lens to analyze, what was happening. This replacement theory is just some paranoid vision, that Fox News is now promoting, but it is not the same as critical race theory. And so I agree with you. Social media, but also traditional journalism has to take responsibility for how it also is giving credence to this.
How do we get the general white public to face white racism and to back down white racism? In Germany, you know, after World War II, you couldn't wave Nazi flags.
Still can't.
You know, it's still against the law. But you got these people walking around with Confederate flags. I see them all the time on the. And to me, that's the anti-racist book that the brother wrote. I think that's the battle that's going to have to be fought in America if America is going to be saved. The white people are going to have to deal with white people.
We've spent so much time trying. Brenda, you've been trying to get in. Brenda, go ahead.
That's
I see
okay.
you waving your hand.
Well, I have a question for Dr. Irma, but I saw this. I've got an echo.
Yeah, you're on twice for some reason, Brenda. You've got two machines or two. Okay, somehow you got double there. Go ahead.
Am I still? I'll go out.
No, go ahead, Brenda.
No, I saw Abbott, Cruz, and Trump. They're heading for the NRA convention this weekend. My understanding, it was 19 children and 2 adults.
It's up to 22 now. It's up to 22.
I just wanted.
We hear you. We still see you.
Oh, okay, good. I just wanted to ask Dr. Irma, and part of it was what Kamau just brought up, but what do we do about mobilizing the good population, the decent people who saw that young father this morning that just made me boo-hoo? He couldn't fathom the fact of looking at his daughter's bedroom. And then Rick Scott says, well, I'm not willing to give up the Second Amendment. I wanted to jump through the TV. It wasn't your daughter. It wasn't your granddaughter. These were innocent children. And 2 adults that put their lives on the line to try to protect these children the same way they did in Sandy Hook. So I'm just curious, what do we do to mobilize and get this information, not just to Blacks and BIPOC communities, but just worldwide? I mean, we've said it over and over. Is this what it's going to take?
I mean, I think we have to do things like petition the United Nations. These are human rights violations. And I think we got to stop thinking of it as a local issue and really begin to deal with it as a global issue. One, to get that kind of pressure put on, so that we get other countries complicit in that. But this is really about the moral compass of white Americans. They have to come forward. We cannot always be the engine that is driving change in this country. Yes. And someone had a note about how do we get them to stop killing us? I don't know how you convince people who in their delusion see us as a threat and a problem simply because we are trying to honor the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. So I don't know how you get people to do that.
Irma was really directed at, while I appreciate the discussion, how do we get us to stop killing us? And that comes up all the time. It's almost if it's an apology for us not paying attention to white people killing us because we're killing ourselves. That's what white people say.
Well, that's true. And that is truth. But I would say then it's the person who wrote it. What are you doing about your nephews, your grandchildren, your children, your neighbors' children? How are you teaching them to have a respect for life and not drink the Kool-Aid of violence that is in this country? because all they're doing is mimicking what they see on TV. So let's stop those shows. You know, the Chicago Police Department, that show to me is like one of the most horrific shows in terms of showing how the police themselves are criminals and then how they brutalize people. And then we want our kids to say, oh, it's okay, I'll just give it a pass. They drink the Kool-Aid, which is the social media Kool-Aid. They drink all kinds of things. You know, they're consuming these things without having the analysis. So I think we have to do a better job of saying, when you kill someone who looks like you, you're almost killing yourself, you know, and that we have to realize that. But we are raising these kids and we have to do something different as well.
It's, you know, it's also Frantz Fanon, you know, he talked about the problems of poverty. You know, if you're poor, you know, you have so many social issues going against you. And in America, if you're poor, you're black, and you have guns, the people are going to turn against each other. Poor people, they're just going to shoot the folk who are around them. And unfortunately, me in Georgia, seeing this in Georgia, unfortunately, there is a monicum of disrespect for each other. Not valuing who we are.
Well, we've internalized racism where we don't think we're worthy enough. You know, that is one of the byproducts of of white supremacy and racism, is that we also think we're not worth anything.
Correct.
Right. So taking our lives by ourselves, you know, is going along with that program. And that's what we have to start getting these kids to recognize, is that you're harming your whole people.
I believe in healing, and I believe in the practice of healing circles. So this is a practice that's come out of indigenous communities and Native American indigenous communities, and also in West African indigenous communities. And so healing circles are spaces, a democratized space where everyone in this circle has the opportunity to speak. And they do this with the community healing team, and the community healing team in North Minneapolis has a healing circle today at 7 o'clock at the Zinbin, the North Side Healing Zone. And this is a space where, you know, they discuss these issues, your emotions, you can address racial trauma, and you also have the resources in the community. So they'll have a Black social worker there, you know, if you need actual physical resources, but also, you know, they teach through breathing exercises, through kind of like the compartmentalization of being Black in America, how to navigate this world. And healing circles, I really am a strong supporter of. I really support Ubuntu, which is the group that leads the community healing team in Northside, Minneapolis. And I really just believe that, yes, we can get therapy, we can get, you know, the physical resources we need, but we also, there's an aspect of communal healing, the healing comes in being together and being seen as one together, that healing circles provide, that I also really support. It's not just, you can't just heal an individual, you have to heal a community right now. And so that's what I really support and I really love.
Jonathan, let me have Jonathan come in. Jonathan, you sent a copy of a article that you published yesterday in the Hallie Q. Brown newsletter. I'm going to ask you to read that. It's a great piece. If you got it handy there, can you just give us a 4-minute read on that?
I can do that. All right.
Yeah, and the reason in part is that this week, the country, the world are reflecting on the murder of George Floyd and what it meant, what it means. And as we reflect on that, as Dr. Irma has said, we're also thinking about what happened in Buffalo, New York, and now what's happening in Texas with the murder of children in an elementary school there. Gun violence at the root of it, but an environment that is adversary to Black life, brown life. Jonathan, did you find it? Did you get it?
Yep, I've got it.
Go ahead.
2 years ago, a Black man was murdered on the streets of Minneapolis, murdered by a person who had sworn a sacred duty to protect him, a person he shouldn't have had to fear in a place. He should have been safe, his community. The issue that led to his murder at the knees of a white police officer, buying cigarettes with a counterfeit $20 bill, and we still do not know if George Floyd was even aware it was fake. A year ago, in the midst of the trial for the man who murdered George Floyd, just 11 miles away from where he died, another black man was murdered at the hands of another white police officer. The issue that led to his murder at the gun of a white police officer, a traffic stop for an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. A traffic stop where a seasoned veteran allegedly mistook her gun for her taser, a stop she would not have made had she not been training new officers. Consider what she taught them. 11 days ago, an 18-year-old white man walked into a predominantly black neighborhood grocery store he had surveilled 3 hours from his home and intentionally opened fire while live streaming his murderous rampage. He had picked the store because of its local black population and his white supremacist belief in the conspiracy theory of white replacement. Even as I write this, the news is streaming in about another 18-year-old man who drove an hour and a half from where he lived after shooting his grandmother to commit the deadliest school shooting since Sandy Hook, 19 children and 2 adults. It is unclear at this point whether race or racism is a factor in this latest tragedy, but the victims are all still primarily children of color. I want to say our world has gone crazy. I want to say we're living in a nightmare and it's time to wake up. I want to say that this is not America, but I can't. The reality is, this is America. This is what America has become as we have continued to allow zealots, extremists, and terrorists to go unchecked and run rampant while we attempt to be reasonable, to come to the table to negotiate, to continue to give the benefit of the doubt while the other side snaps the ball away at the last minute, like Lucy in the Peanuts cartoon. Hope is never a bad thing. Hope motivates us to strive harder, to reach higher, to do our very best, but it also must be tempered by reason and, when necessary, caution. We live in a country whose very foundation is built upon the massacre and colonization of indigenous persons and their lands, along with the abduction, enslavement, rape, mutilation, and murder of black persons, and the overall oppression of people of color and poor people. These facts are not in doubt, yet we are only just now, over 400 years later, beginning to acknowledge them. We live in a country that thinks a zygote is a fully realized and sentient human being with rights, but is yet to decide if a black person is. We live in a country where people will fight to regulate a person's body as a measure of being, quote unquote, pro-life, and then fight with the same fervor against the regulation of guns that are killing our children because their right to bear arms is more important than the right to life. After the child is born, that is. We live in a country where the notion that a theory that holds there's a countrywide conspiracy to replace white people with black and brown people and immigrants is considered more legitimate than the theoretical framework that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policy. And so it is no wonder that we find ourselves in America. An America built upon privilege, oppression, and marginalization, but held as a shining example because the dominant narrative of white people is allowed to perpetuate and proliferate. From top to bottom, our country has no sense of itself, propagating myths and fables of white victimhood in favor of retention of power and control, whereas the real victims are the least among us, the brown babies in the classroom, the predominantly black community in a grocery store, Brianna, Sandra, Dante, George, Philando. We cannot change the past. The systemic racism which permeates our society arrived with the first foreign shoes to set foot on this soil and led right to the murders of Brianna, Sandra, Dante, George, and Philando. Nothing we can do can bring them back, but we can forge a new future, learning from their utterly untimely deaths and not letting them die in vain. We can forge a new future by building on the legacy of George Floyd, by challenging the systems that allow these tragic events to unfold, by standing fast and unyielding and demanding the equality that is ours by right and by truth. We can build a new legacy in this country filled with the unity and love that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us so well. And we can finally realize a true nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all people are created equal.
Thank you.
Shay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Irma, enjoy your last night in Paris and dinner.
I will. I'm going to have to go. I would just close with what I closed the article with, in which I said, America needs a healing. America needs a healing. The survivors, I hope, will be human.
Thank
Take a
you.
minute before you leave, Irma, to talk about Paris. It's so wonderful that you're able to stick with us from South Africa 2 weeks ago now in Paris. I'm excited just that you're here with us.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to talk about it next week because I got people waiting for me. But I had a meeting yesterday with on the canal with a group of people who are trying to change their neighborhood, and they were interested in what we did at URock. So I was able to tell that story and share some of the strategies and stuff. And I just got an email today saying, maybe we'll bring you back because there's a college here that's trying to figure out how to do community engagement with the local community. So having impact, and hey, it all begins in Minneapolis.
There we go. Well, Irma, thank
How
you
about
so
that?
much.
But I'll have more to say next week.
All
Okay.
right, thank you.
Travel safe.
Okay.
Travel safe.
Safe.
Love you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Angela, let me bring you in. Angela, always love your critique and your analysis and your voice. We get comments on the energy and the passion that you bring. What are your thoughts, both from Dr. Irma's and Brother Jonathan's pieces?
No, both of the pieces were absolutely powerful. I think for Dr. Irma's, there's a part that we mentioned earlier about, whiteness, right? And white folk have to really take this on as their issues as well. And, there is Tracy McMillan, a journalist out of New York, and she's a white journalist who she's also talking about, how racism impacts white folk. And it does. I mean, yes, we can understand white opportunity hoarding. We can understand, the benefits that white folk have from racism, but also there is a cost. And there's a cost to our country right now. And there's a particular part that that Dr. Irma talks about the failure of our democracy. And if we truly want a true democracy, racism cannot thrive here in our country. If we want a true democracy where everyone has power, where everyone has a say, and where our structures are working are well-oiled and working, racism cannot thrive. Because right now what I've seen, and what I've even seen in the city of Minneapolis, is racism undercutting our government structures. So the police department, it came out that the state human rights department put out their report that the police were surveilling Black organizations and Black community leaders like myself, right? They didn't name me, but they named the Minneapolis NAACP as an organization that was targeted, surveilled, and harassed by the Minneapolis Police Department. And instead of the city of Minneapolis, instead of actually looking at themselves and trying to comply and do a consent decree well, they have come out and they have actually left the negotiations for the consent decree. And they are questioning the evidence and the data of the state human rights department. They are trying to invalidate the state human rights department's investigation in order to say that they are not racist. And that to me just goes to show how racism tries to undercut our local processes and also our state processes, because that is a clear, they would rather invalidate the state of Minnesota's human rights department than listen to community members. Because also you didn't need a report to say what is in that report, that y'all are racist. You should have listened to community members first. But in trying to fight it and trying to safeguard their racism, they are undercutting our democratic processes and our state processes. And that's just an example. And I'm sure there's so many other numerous ways that states and governments really almost attack and implode on itself in order to protect racism instead of protecting democracy. And that's something where I really do believe that Dr. Irma's analysis was very clear that, racism will kill our democracy. And we can only hope to survive it and to also create a new reality where we have a new democracy, new systems that don't have racism embedded in them.
I have a quick question for Kamau. Kamau, legally, how does Clarence Thomas stay on the court?
Because he'd have to be impeached to get off the court first, it's a lifetime appointment, and that's being looked at. It is being looked at. I mean, across the board. I went to a lecture with Eric Holder last week, and that's one of the things that is being talked about, these lifetime appointments for the Supreme Court justices, people who are not elected and who have such a great impact. But he would have to be impeached, and he's not going to be impeached under the present circumstances. Brother Jonathan, is it? Yeah. Beautiful piece, and
it really was.
It's a beautiful piece. I just don't have the hope that what you're saying is going to come true. I think that America is on a downward spiral that can't be changed. And I think that China, Russia, it's going down. And for the reasons that Rose spoke about, they fight against common sense and facts.
Well, they said China and Russia were doing military exercises while Biden was in China.
Yeah, well, the whole thing about Taiwan. I think I mentioned this book about the coming confrontation. If China goes after Taiwan the way Putin has gone after Ukraine, that's why they were so upset when Biden said, yes, we will step in. We don't want to step in against China. That would be almost suicide.
Yusef, go ahead. Yusef, and then
Jonathan. Angela, in terms of the Human Rights Department report, the department could not have done that report on their own, so they solicited help from a woman who is the former Attorney General for the state of Illinois and other legal experts. And the most damning information in the report didn't come from the community. It came from within the Minneapolis Police Department, because they interviewed Minneapolis police officers, present and former, about some of the challenges and opportunities and patterns and practices that exist within the department. To Jonathan, that one drop rule, actually, when I was a young man, your age, they used to refer to it as the little dabble do you rule, because it's still in full effect anywhere you look, and it's still true in terms of Irma said, you have to work 10 times as hard. I used to say, boy, you got to work twice as hard to get half a chance. And I wanted to point that out to Kamau, who asked, how do we deal with white people and get them to begin to address these issues? And I want to compliment the piece you wrote too, Jonathan.
It was really good.
I have been engaging in this tense dialogue between elders and millennials, okay? Because a millennial told me that people our age need to get out the way and sit down and let young people take over the world, because we've been giving advice for an entire generation and nothing has changed. Well, they're saying two things. One, they're saying that if the white man was going to do right, he would have done it by now. And they're also saying that they're tired of trying to save white folks from themselves. So I think that we have to organize and unify to the question that Al raised within our own communities before we can reach out to other communities and embrace them to pick up their own armor, because it really is a white problem, okay, in terms of white supremacy. And I mentioned earlier that the oppression of Black people has been the archetypal form if you read the book on caste, Isabel Wilkerson's book, she said that the Nazis went to South America, they went to Australia, and they came to the United States. And when they got to the United States, they said, cancel all the other trips. These folks are experts. They wrote the book. They've been doing this for 350 years. And they could adopt everything that white people were doing in America and apply it toward the Jews, except one thing. What was that one thing that they refused to do with the Jews in Germany? The one-drop rule. Okay? They said it was too cruel even to do to Jewish people. So everyone has acknowledged, the impact of racism. Where they fell short, I always say it's easy to tell people what you're against, to say you're an anti-racist. The hard part is telling people what you're prepared to do and what you're doing, okay? What your social practice is and what your body of work and legacy is going to be in this arena, because it's not a part-time job. It's not something you can do on Saturday and Sunday and then go back to the office and have business as usual on Monday. So we really do need to continue to work within our own churches, within our own community-based organizations, fraternities, sororities, health clinics, etc., and particularly within the educational context, in the schools, in the universities, and wherever people gather to share knowledge and implement social practice in the community. So our responsibility, first and foremost, is self and kind, as the Muslims used to say. And then once we master that, we can begin to do the outreach and encourage others to, which they've been doing. If you want to know where white kids are at today, look at where black kids were 10 years ago, okay? Mahmoud al-Khatib. They're going to imitate whatever we do anyhow. So, we might as well get on with it. And what does Spike Lee say? Do the right thing. Have we got anything better to do than to work toward our own liberation?
I absolutely agree, and I would say
that's why first of all, Yusef, I can't believe you brought up Brill Cream. All right, so I'm mad at you for that. But going back to Kamau's point, and what Yusef is talking about is exactly why I do have I understand exactly where you are, brother, and I don't blame you or disagree with you on that. I tend to be an eternal optimist only because I know how resilient Black people are. And I know that this change is going to be led by us and that white people will follow that as we go out. We shouldn't have to be the ones doing that, but they follow the trends with us. And this is the first time I have seen so much energy around paying attention to race, to class, to different things along these lines.
Post George Floyd.
Post George Floyd. And young people of all backgrounds coming together and focusing on this issue. I gave a talk. I've been doing talks with boards of nonprofits about systemic racism and about critical race theory. And it was a predominantly white board, and every one of them was, yes, this is what we need to do. This is the changes that we need to have. This is what I'm committed to. So there is pieces out there. It's not enough yet. I'm with you right now. That's not enough, but it is. White people have to step up. White people have to be a part of this change, be an engine for this change, and own their part in this. They don't have to take blame, but they've got to own and acknowledge. And we stop teaching slavery as the history of Black people, and we start teaching as the history of white people. And
I sent Jonathan yesterday.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope you're right.
I sent Jonathan an article called How to Create a Pro-Black Nonprofit. And I sent all of you, I shared an article from the New York Times about Haiti and the reparations that they had to pay for over 100 years to France. And I hope that we can talk about that in the future, because
but even with that reparations to France, the New York Times put that out like that was some news, right? But Black historians have been talking
CLR James, sure.
And there is something of you can't wake a man who's pretending to be asleep, right? And there's a lot of white folk out here who are pretending to be asleep. And every time we go, every year, every month to
say it, Angela.
The politician's office, and you say, here are the racial disparities. Oh wow!
Kamau,
you scared him so much it froze you, honey.
Kamau, you have kind of an apocalyptic vision. It comes across to me when you talk about the what's ahead, that there's almost no way to avoid the train wreck in the future. Go into that for me. Maybe I've said it too strongly, but I'm interested in the logical extension of the collision that you envision. What does that mean?
You know, I'm also a student of the Bible, and you know, Isaiah predicted the downfall of Egypt, the downfall of several nations. You know, just based on what he was seeing at the time, and through God's spirit in him. And from my perspective and my reading, the United States, born in racism, you know, is born in a lot of evil stuff. Even though there's a lot of good in America, I used to be proud to say I was American when I was overseas. Now I'm kind of
dare say it,
huh?
Now you better not dare say it.
Yeah, now I'm kind of not only better not dare say it, but kind of ashamed of it. And the things that happened yesterday is like that. And what I see, Alvin, based on the book of Revelations, this cannot continue. This cannot continue. And I just see a downward spiral. And even though, and Angela, what I wanted to ask you is that I like that idea about the kids, but when I do that, it's the kids. I'm talking to the choir. I'm talking to the kids who already understand it, who are good kids. How do I pull in the ones who are even one or two of them who need to hear that? So
honestly, unfortunately, there's a number of issues that are happening with the kids in our community right now, and we cannot, underestimate the fact that suicide rates for children and Black children have gone up, right? Depression, anxiety issues have gone up, and then also drug abuse has gone up too. So, honestly, if I'm going to be very honest, we have a lot of the kids who you're preaching to the choir because they know, we inherently know. A lot of America should know, and the folks who don't know, they're pretending. They're pretending to be asleep, in my opinion, right? They're faking it, and everyone else is trying to manage, and particularly our youth, how to be a young person looking at an apocalypse, right? Coming down the line. You have climate change, you have issues of a democracy, we have world wars, on the precipice. And you're looking at an apocalypse, and how do you manage that within yourself? And then we live in a society that hands you drugs and says, make them taste like candy. And I'm talking specifically about,
drugs and guns.
Drugs and guns that taste, and the drugs taste like candy. And I'm talking specifically about a specific, drug that tastes like candy and that looks like candy. And so, it's really disheartening, because also these social resources that they need to feel community aren't there. The schools are breaking down. There's no community centers really, other than the few like Hallie Q. Brown and others that are holding on for, really holding on. And other than that, there really should be, a space on every block that a kid could go after 5, after 6 p.m., and just be and exist. There really should be these places where you don't have to buy a coffee to be there, and nobody's looking you up and down, being like, oh, this is a kid that's a thug, right? And so there really should be more spaces where the elders and the youth have more conversations, because, the youth are listening to you, Mr. King, and you, Mr. Yusef, but there's a lot of other elders who are just looking at them like they are the undesirables in their community. And you can't do that. And we need more elders who are willing to take it on as a personal responsibility to look after these kids too, even if they're strung out. Even if they, might be high right now, maybe even if their pants are on the ground and you can see all of their, their boxers, even if, and to still love them and to still cherish them and to still say, I can, we can get you what you need.
Yeah.
So let me close with this. We don't talk about books every week. I'm reading this one. I've been on, as you all know, an Ikwe Arma binge. This is what I'm reading right now. It's called The Healers. And last night or this morning, as I read, I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs of it that are germane to this conversation, and talks about the accountability, the responsibility of elders to the young people, and where we have failed sometimes, how we have failed in the context of this novel. The background of this paragraph is an elder in this village is going to talk to a young person who's naturally gifted, a natural leader, but who's not the person who is in standing as the successor to the king who's died or about to die. And he wants to bring this number 2 guy, a good kid, who's not power hungry, into a position where he can manipulate him for his own advantage and to set the direction for the village and the community for the future. He says, the whites are going to control this land as surely as your father is dead, but they cannot control the whole land without help from the people they trust, Black people they trust. Power comes from work, a lot of work. There will be fighting, war. We shall have to help the whites by finding men to fight for them here and everywhere. We'll have to find carriers for the things the fighters need and for the white officers. The whites will want to buy food for the soldiers. They will need laborers to build roads. Don't you see? Once we agree to work for the whites, we put ourselves on the road to power. It's a road without end. If we do not help the whites, we should be left by the roadside. And if we are such fools as to stand against the whites, they will grind us until we become less than impotent, less than grains of bad snuff tossing in the storms. This is the choice before every one of us. I myself have already chosen, and those who think like me have chosen. We shall be on the side of the whites. That is where power lies. We have chosen power because we find impotence disgusting. What I am doing now is inviting you to be on the same side. That is disturbing, but I think it's an accurate dramatization, characterization of the nature, the role, the metering of power, and the failure in humanity in general, but our people in particular, in understanding power and the fact that we have alternatives and choices. So I'll leave it with that. That's what I'm reading. It's I equate Arma. The book is called The Healers. What are you guys reading?
I guess that's the choice that Clarence Thomas made.
Yeah. Angela, what are you reading?
I'm reading Separate Roads to Feminism, Black Chicana White Feminist Movements in America's Second Wave. So there's a misconception, a fallacy that the Black feminist movement and Chicana feminist movement came out of the white feminist movement, when in actuality, these movements emerged alongside each other in the same time period, but were not together. Right. So it didn't come out of the Black women were organizing, and they did not need white women to tell us to organize for us to organize on their behalf. And so
who was the author, Angela? Who's the author?
Yes, Benita Roth. It's a fantastic book, and then also goes to show Black feminists and white feminist movements who helped organize NOW. So not many people know Polly Murray, who's a Black woman, was one of the founders of NOW, the National Organization for Women, which is the premier white women's organization of this era. So Black women were helping white women organize. It was not the other way around. So that's what this book is about. I really recommend it. It's fantastic if you're interested in second wave feminism and also transnational feminist theory.
I'm reading a book edited by Eddie Glaude called Is It Nation Time? Contemporary Essays on Black Power and Black Nationalism. It has some interesting historiography in it. And I pick it up, I put it down, I pick it up, I put it down. But it's very informative about the authors of the essays themselves, as well as the subject matter that they were writing about. So interesting.
Kamau?
Eddie was the SGA president at Morehouse when I was down there. So he was sharp back then. He is sharp today as ever. I'm rereading one of my favorites. Let's see if I can do this. It's Echoes of the Old Dark Land by Dr. Charles Finch. Themes from the African Eden. It is not a long book, so you can read through it really good. It basically starts off with, okay, if you believe in evolution, here's how you know everything started in Africa, because here's the specific gorillas and the evolution. Now, if you believe in the Bible, here's why everything started in Africa, and it goes into the Nile Valley sources of the Old Testament. It goes in the Egyptian mystery system. It is one of my favorite books because it dismantles so much of the myths of the world multi-regional theory of evolution, or we started in all these places, and it goes, no, everything was in Africa. Here's where it started. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, Dr. Charles Finch is one of my favorites. He's my neighbor, and he's my favorite.
You know him?
Oh yeah. I coached his son basketball. But I'm rereading. I'm reading like
Tell him I love his book
at the same time. The second, I'm still going through the 1619 project. Raised Fish, Bent Knees. So I'm reading several books.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Raised Fish, Bent Knee.
Oh yeah,
it's an interesting documentary too.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix.
Why don't you get Dr. Finch to join us if he would sometime?
I'll try.
Let him know that I buy extra copies of his book and I give them out to people.
Okay.
I like his book that much.
Okay.
Brenda,
if you get a chance, check out the book.
He's very, very jealous with his time. So that very, very much so.
If you get a chance, check out Reading While Black. And I have the book. I can't find it, but I know we're short of time. It's pretty deep.
Say Reading
While Black. And I just got it in the mail, and I was trying to find it because I forgot the author. But it's on Black religion, and it's a deep piece.
Speaking of Black religion, let me share this one with you. God Comments, God Moments for Men. It's just a
wow.
Just a book of different sayings I read every morning. Like this here is real faith, real love. It's just one page inspirational reading. Yeah, God Moments for Black Men.
Angela,
I
what
love
are you reading?
Thirsties.
Oh, you told us. I'm sorry.
And it's by
I'm trying to find my book. I just had it.
What is this guy's name? Andrew Holmes. God Moments for Black Men. Andrew Holmes. Okay. It's inspirational. And kind of knocking on, it puts some things in your brain that you need there. Okay.
Wait a second for Brenda to come back, but until
I found it.
Did you find it? Go ahead, Brenda.
Reading While Black.
And the author is
Esau McCauley.
Sean McCauley.
Bring it back a little bit to you, Brenda. Back up and up. There you go, right there. Perfect. Reading While Black. Okay. Well, read that and let's talk about it. And anytime that you guys read something, if you want to help me or reach out to the author and ask the author to join the conversation, I think it'd be very cool. I'd love to do it, and I think people would enjoy doing that because they get critical feedback from us. We're critical thinkers, and this is a rich conversation. I enjoy this so much. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next Thursday. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Love you,
Angela, we have healing circles on Fridays with Dr. Bravada Garrett Akinsanya every Friday.
Tomorrow, Ilhan Omar will be on the program. So that'll be very interesting. And I think I've got people coming from one of the area hospitals as well, talking about their diversity initiatives. So yeah, Friday, good program, but particularly tomorrow with Ilhan Omar. And I think next Friday, the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, is going to be on. So that'll be a great program as well.
And she does the native and the African.
Tomorrow 1 o'clock. Yeah. Okay. All right, guys, take care.
All right, take
care.
Thank you all.
Love Thursdays. Thank you.